Hi, my name is Alex Lokai, and what I want to do now is take a few minutes to walk you through the curriculum for Introduction to Apologetics. As you may know, it is 11 sessions. Each one is about 3 hours long. We recommend that you teach them in your church in 1-week intervals. They will come with corresponding PowerPoints. They will come with the curriculum, all of which you can download from the website. In addition, we recommend that whoever is teaching them go through the videos of the teachings because that has the maximum amount of information. The first session is called Defining God, Defining God. And our first question that we answer is, what is apologetics? So we look at what apologetics is now and what it has been historically. Then we look at 7 major views on God. We look at some of these other religions and how they view God. We look at things like pantheism, theism, deism, and those kind of things. Next, we're going to look at some of the attributes of the Christian God. For example, God is eternal, God is timeless, God is love, and we're going to look at the biblical justification for that. Next, we're going to look at and discuss classical arguments for the existence of God. These are arguments that have been around for centuries, of which some are still valid today in the 21st century. We're going to discuss the watchmaker argument, the cosmological argument, and so forth. And finally, we're going to show you how to plant doubt in an atheist's mind. Very quick questions that you can ask an atheist that will plant doubt in their mind. As an example, you could say to an atheist, Mr. Atheist, do you know everything? And inevitably they will say no. Then you can ask them, well, what percentage of everything do you think you know? And let's assume they say, I know 30% of everything. Then you can ask them, well, is it possible that God exists in the 70% of information that you don't have? Of course, if they say, no, that's not possible, then you can respond by saying, well, then you're saying that you actually do know the 70% and you do know everything. So we're going to give you quick methods to plant doubt immediately in the atheist's mind. We're also going to give you counter arguments. In other words, if they come back, we want to give you counter arguments. For example, an atheist can say to the Christian, well, Mr. Christian, how can you be so sure that God does exist? And of course, the way I would respond to that, I would say, I am sure that God exists, and I could be sure that God exists. Well, how could you be sure that God exists? Well, then I would say to the atheist, does your mom exist? Does your mother exist? Of course, they will say yes. Well, how do you know your mother exists? Well, because I've known her all my life. I have a relationship with her. I've met her before. Of course. Well, as a Christian, I could be certain that God exists because for the same reasons that you could be certain your mother exists. Because I know God, because I have a relationship with God. I've seen God move in my life. So I could, as a Christian, have certainty that, in fact, God exists. And that wraps up session number 1. The next session, session number 2, is called Conversations That Count. Conversations that count. Here we're going to look at the role of apologetics in evangelism, how we could really take these powerful arguments and incorporate them into our evangelism. The next thing we're going to discuss is what's called the Socratic method. What this is a method of talking to people where you're asking questions to undermine their assumptions and to kind of expose their contradictions. Because we believe that the best way to lead someone to a decision is by leading them to their own conclusions. And we're going to do this by asking questions and leading them, let them think through and come to their own conclusions. You know, the Bible records that in the Gospels that Jesus asked over 200 questions. And of course, he knew the answer to those questions, and the reason he did is, once again, he was trying to expose their faulty arguments. Finally, this session is going to close out by looking at flawed arguments. That is to say, we're going to look at about 7 or 8 flawed arguments. For example, we're going to look at the straw man argument, the red herring, the nirvana fallacy, and we're going to give you a method of really identifying problematic arguments when they come your way. And that will close out session number 2. Session number 3 is called What is Truth? What is truth? You know, we believe that if you get this one wrong, your entire worldview is going to be faulty. So we really kind of want to help you through this thinking of what is truth? How do we define truth? So we're going to define the concept of truth. We're going to help you discern the difference between an opinion, a true statement, and absolute truth. That is truth that is eternal and timeless. Then we're going to discuss several sources of truth. For example, scientific truth, revelation, philosophical truth, and once again give you tools to help you identify a true statement. We will then discuss the many versions of relativism, for example, multiculturalism, postmodernism, pluralism, and we're going to kind of look at these, and then we're going to look at the flaws in these worldviews. By the time you're done, you're going to realize that there isn't a relativist in the world who believes that truth is relative. You can't get out of bed in the morning and believe this stuff. And we're going to actually give you real simple questions to ask those who believe truth is relative or morality is relative that will really expose how faulty these arguments and this belief is. And that will close out session number 3. Session number 4 is called Understanding Worldviews. Understanding Worldviews. And first thing we're going to do is define the concept of worldview and what makes a worldview valid. Next, we're going to look at methods of testing a worldview. How do we know this worldview is legitimate? And as an example, a worldview to be legitimate, you have to be able to apply it consistently in your life. Let me give you an example of where this is problematic. The atheist will look at, say, some cave drawings. They'll go into a cave and look at the drawings on the wall and say, this is the product of design. But then they'll look at something like an eye, or a kidney, or a fruit tree, or a bird in flight and say, this, while much more complex than the cave drawing, is the product of chance. They cannot possibly apply their worldview consistently. And so we're going to look at the worldview, what makes a worldview valid, and we're going to give you about 5 methods of testing a worldview. Then we're going to discuss competing worldviews. We're going to look at Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Buddhism, Hinduism, and we're going to really show you the flaws in these worldviews and these religions. And finally, we're going to close out this session by looking at the the uniqueness of the Christian worldview. What makes Christianity different from all other religions and worldviews? And that will close out session number 4. Session number 5 is titled Evolution, Naturalism, and Creation. Evolution, Naturalism, and Creation. This section is going to be very unique from what you've heard in the past because we're not going to try to introduce our own science or reinterpret science. What we're going to do is we're going to take popular science, what you see on the Discovery Channel, what they're teaching in the high schools, and we're going to use this evidence to discredit the theory of evolution. We're going to look at problems with naturalism. First, we're going to define it, then we're going to look at some of the problems with naturalism, for example, near-death experiences, the problem of consciousness, and all these different other problems that the naturalist could never account for. We're going to look at problems with evolution. We're going to look at the natural selection. What are some of the problems with natural selections? We're going to look at random mutations, why this is not a valid method of explaining the diversity in nature. We're going to look at their strongest evidence, the fossil record, and we're going to show you once again there's big problems with the fossil record, which they would claim would be their strongest evidence. And then we're going to look at human evolution. And we're going to close out this session by discussing the image of God. And does this better define what we see in mankind today? And that will close out session number 5. Session number 6 is called Intelligent Design. We've titled it Intelligent Design. And here we're going to define the theory of intelligent design. We're going to look at some of the limits of science. What can we learn from science and what science cannot tell us about human nature and the world we live in. We're going to look at intelligent design versus chance. Despite the fact that many evolutionists believe that evolution isn't chance, we're going to show you why it is and what are the problems with that idea. We're going to give you very powerful evidence for the existence of God in the universe, in the biosphere, in the genetic code, and these are we're packaging this as strong witnessing tools that you could use when talking to an atheist, and that would close out session number 6. Session number 7 is entitled, Who Do Men Say That I Am? Who do men say that I am? We're going to start this session by looking at messianic prophecies and really look at some of the probabilities of one man fulfilling all these prophecies. And again, give you really a powerful witnessing tool for Jesus as the Messiah. We're going to look at evidence for the life of Jesus because, as you may know, many secularists are claiming Jesus didn't even exist. So we're going to show you that historically speaking, this is just totally false, and in fact there are no credible academic historians that would take this position. Next, we're going to look at the evidence for the resurrection. You know, as Paul said, if Christ is not risen from the dead, our faith is futile. So as believers, I believe that we should have very strong evidence, very strong testimony for the resurrection of Jesus. And we're going to actually walk you through many reasons why we believe that Jesus historically was raised from the dead, and this is not simply a myth as many would claim. Next, we're going to look at Jesus in the Old Testament. We're going to see how Jesus actually did reveal himself in the Old Testament and help us to really reconcile the Old Testament with the New. And then we're going to look at other religious leaders and look at them in light of Jesus. You know, is Jesus a more credible prophet, religious leader than, say, Muhammad and Buddha and so forth? And that would close out session number 7. Session number 8 is called, Can I Trust the Bible? Can I trust the Bible? And the first question we're going to answer is, how do we know the Bible is inspired? We're going to give you 7 reasons why we believe that this book we call the Bible is in fact inspired by God, why all these others are not. As an example, we're going to look at the accuracy of biblical prophecy, and we're going to give you some very strong prophecies that you can use as a witnessing tool. And we're going to also compare the prophecies of the Bible with those of, say, Nostradamus, who many claim was quite the prophet. We're going to look at hermeneutics. What is hermeneutics? Which is, of course, the science of interpreting Scripture. And we're going to kind of help you, give you really 3 steps on how to properly interpret Scripture so you don't fall into fallacy. We're going to look at apparent contradictions in the Bible. This is important because, you know, when I was in college in the early 90s, you would say to someone, oh, there are no contradictions in the Bible, and that would end the argument. But today, if you say that to someone, they'll put in contradictions in the Bible in Google, and they will email you a list of 300 contradictions in the Bible. So we're going to give you 3 steps on how to disseminate these contradictions and show that, in fact, there are no contradictions in the Bible. We're going to look at the lost Gospels. Today, many secularists claim that there were other Gospels that were left out of the 4 Gospels that we have. And so we're going to look at the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Thomas, and show you why, in fact, these were not included and why they should have never been included. We're going to look at the process of how we got our Bible. And again, many secularists today are the Bible is a product of powerful church leaders who got together in a meeting in the 4th century and came up with the canon that we have today. And of course, we're going to really discredit that and show you how, in fact, the Bible was an organic process. We're going to look at the New Testament documents and give you a strong evidence why we believe they are reliable, the actual words of the disciples. We're going to look at New Testament extra biblical accounts to show, in fact, the credibility of the Bible. We're not just going to look at the Bible, we're going to look at these other sources that show how they actually give support to our Bible. And we're going to do the same thing with the Old Testament. We're going to look at the Old Testament documents, and we're going to look at extra biblical accounts. And that would close out session number 8. Session number 9 is called Understanding Evil and Suffering. Understanding evil and suffering. If you've done a lot of witnessing over the years, as I have, you are going to find that the problem of suffering is one of the most difficult problems that we will deal with when witnessing to people. So we're going to first try to understand the complexity of evil. Then we're going to discuss how a loving God could allow evil to exist. And we're going to look at, is this the best of all possible worlds? And why did God, in fact, create a world and allow evil to exist? We're going to look at the ultimate foundation for morality, because as you may know, many atheists today are claiming the high moral ground, and we're going to show you why they don't have a basis for their morality, why we have the best basis for morality. We're going to discuss the question of whether there is, in fact, purpose behind suffering and what that purpose might be. We're going to discuss also the sanctioned killings in the Bible, because many today claim that there's this God of love in the New Testament and this God of war in the Old, but we're going to actually reconcile what we believe is the God of love with the God of justice, and we're going to reconcile the Old and the New Testament for you. And finally, we're going to discuss how the Christian should deal with pain and suffering, first in our own life and then in the life of others. And that will close out session number 9. Session number 10 is titled The Christian Legacy. The Christian Legacy. And The first question we're going to answer is religion good for society? Because once again, secularists today are trying to erase religion from society, and we're going to answer the question whether it is good for society or not. Then we're going to discuss religion and wars, because once again, there's a big myth that I heard all my life in college that says most wars are the product of religion. Most wars are religious wars. And we're going to show you that quite the opposite is true, that the greatest mass murders in human history were in fact atheists, not religious people. Then we're going to look at the evolution of human rights, and we're going to show you their biblical foundation and why it is in fact no coincidence that things like human rights emerge in Western civilization and not anywhere else. We're going to look at the discovery of the scientific process and once again show you the biblical roots and answer the question, why did the scientific process emerge in Western civilization and not in any other civilizations? We're going to look at the rise of public education and show you once again its biblical foundations. And then we're going to look at charity and caring for the poor. And we're going to show you that in fact Christianity is the most charitable philosophy in human history. No one has done charity like Christians throughout history. We're going to look at Christianity and art, and we're going to show you how in fact the greatest works of art were done under the Christian worldview and show you the destruction of the arts that has happened under the secular worldview. And we're going to do the same for Christianity and architecture. And that will close out session number 10. Session number 11 is entitled Christianity and Public Policy. Christianity and Public Policy. The first question we're going to answer here is, what is the role of Christians in public policy and politics? Is there a place for us there? Next, we're going to look at marriage and give you a strong apologetic argument for the institute of marriage and show you how in fact it is the most important social institution in Western civilization. Next, we're going to look at same-sex marriage. We're not only going to look at it biblically, but we're going to look at the data that we have coming from Europe, who adopted same-sex marriage over 15 years ago, and show you how, in fact, it will lead to the destruction not only of marriage, but of society as a whole. We're going to look at abortion. Again, we're not going to just look at it biblically. We're going to give you strong scientific evidence as to why we believe that life begins at conception. We're going to look at hate crime legislation. We're going to show you how, in fact, it is not only unconstitutional but unbiblical. We're going to look at taxation. We're going to answer the question, is there a maximum tax rate that the Bible would support? You know, what is too much taxes? And then we're going to look at modern feminism, and we're going to contrast that with biblical feminism, and once again show you the destruction that it's had on our society over the last 40 or 50 years. We're going to look at this concept of separation of church and state, and once again we're going to show you how this was not the intent of the founding fathers when they wrote the First Amendment. And finally, we're going to look at the sexual revolution and show you the actual destruction that it's had in our society over the last 40 or 50 years. And that will close out the entire course and session number 11. We hope you enjoy it. We hope that you commit to this and really teach it to your members, because everything we do here, we're doing it in light of apologetics and evangelism. This is a training course on evangelism and how to relate to the 21st secular society that we live in. And most importantly, we take the time to make it real simple. We start each session with certain questions that we want to answer, and at the end of the session, we actually discuss those questions and once again give you that strong biblical Christian argument for those questions. Once again, enjoy. All you have to do is go to the Education tab, and you can download the PowerPoints, the videos, the curriculum, and everything else. Enjoy. Thank you.